Welcome to today's webinar, SKU Selections, Hydrocarbon, Distillate, and Solventless. My name is Patrick Williams, and I'm the Managing Editor of Cannabis Business Times. This presentation will explore the variety of end products or SKUs that are made using distillation, hydrocarbon, or solventless extraction. Today, we're going to be learning from Josh Rutherford from the PurePressure team, who will explain these end products, the best input materials for each, and the variety of end products that can be created following these extraction methods and from the context of vertically integrated businesses. So just before we begin with today's presentation, I just want to make a few quick notes. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. If you click that, it'll open the Q&A box. Feel free to type your questions for Josh into that box as the presentation's going on. We're going to try to get as many questions as possible on the back end of the presentation. Also know that we are recording today's presentation, so the audio and video and the slides will all be recorded. We'll be distributing that link to all registrants via email in the coming days. With that being said, I'm very pleased to welcome Josh Rutherford, who is one of the co-founders of PurePressure, and he now serves as VP of Corporate Development for PurePressure and Agrify. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate the warm welcome. Glad to be here with all of you here on today's session. I'm going to be talking, significantly about different methods, SKUs, making sure that you guys are successful associated with the operations, depending on which path you go to. We'll also be kind of going into why it's important to have multiple different variations of extraction within your operation, and the scale in which, some of these types of processes are able to achieve different goals that you might have within your business. Not every business is alike in the cannabis industry, as you all very well know. You can hit anything from affordable products to very high-end products, but there is a happy medium in between both. And finding those are very keys to success. I have established multiple brands within the cannabis space, not only on the equipment side, but also on the extraction and go-to-market side of things. It is very important when you're doing these things to, fully grasp what your market specifically has what your specific market is after, whether it's edibles, concentrates, all of those type of things. So without further ado, let's get going here. I'm going to go into full screen. So what is a SKU? SKU Defined. Basically, when you take into account of a SKU compared to what is a product, it's really important to notice the key components of certain packaging when you're really factoring in what is my product going to look like, and how am I going to differentiate myself over the SKUs. We'll go over package design and those type of things in the very near future of this presentation. But I wanted to point out a few key things associated with packaging right away that you might find on certain people's brands. You have your UPC, or your SKU barcode identifier, which is something that you'll see on every single product, no matter whether you're in your grocery store or, your cannabis dispensary. That just allows, seed to sale, or, whatever type of product you're buying in the grocery store to auto register and ring up the correct pricing. It's really important to have what your product is made from. So whether or not that's distillate, whether or not it is live resin, solventless, there are many different things that you can do. This one is specifically a cannabis infused milk chocolate. Instead of you saying maybe a cannabis infused, you could say a CBD THC infused milk chocolate if it had CBD and wasn't just 100 milligram THC edible. The strength per package is really important, as well as, what flavor you're going to have clearly identified, and the spacing is also very important. So not only when the bud tender is discussing this with the client, they hone in on these key components. So your net weight is also something very important, how many pieces you can have. The one thing that I did want to point out on this packaging that, I would encourage a lot of you guys to do on your packaging is it says 20 pieces and it says 100 milligrams here. One of the biggest things to note is it's 5 milligrams per THC serving. So you can know, you don't obviously have to do that calculation yourself. It automatically already tells you, okay, how am I going to dose myself? You can put out educational material as well within this product. So, you can have supporting stuff, whether or not it's in the store lobby or in the store itself, depending on what that store might have in mind for success. But you can have all sorts of different things to greatly affect the success of the market and set yourself apart on the shelf. The other thing that is kind of hidden behind here is how to open the packages. Sometimes that is a missed component of people, and people get frustrated associated with it. Cannabis market, kind of SKUs defined. One of the biggest important products here is obviously the flower market. You see that is a top selling cannabis. This was provided by FlowHub, which basically kind of consolidated the entire products of the United States in order to get this type of information. You can see, 61% is a big flower market, but concentrate is one of the fastest growing areas within, the cannabis industry, whether or not that's vapes, whether or not that's dabbable concentrates, or, edibles is also a very emerging market. When you see vapes and edibles and dabbable concentrates, you normally see those all together in one license structure, so that one business could be able to produce, concentrates, edibles, non-edible products, tinctures, and when you're able to do those, capsules, those type of things all have big revenue behind them. So, even though you see these at, lower percentages, as a market starts to kind of come in, you're looking at it from a component of, okay, everyone knows flower, right? Everyone's been smoking who's in the cannabis industry for, a significant period of time. They know, they enjoy flower smoking. They can enjoy concentrate, topicals, edibles, all of those different components. But as you start to shift and become a more educated market, what those happen is you start to see that crossover. People using more topicals, people going directly to edibles because they find what works for them. You'll have people who can eat a chocolate and not end up with the effect. You could have somebody eat that same milligram component of that chocolate, but in a gummy form, and that metabolism, had a different effect because of how their body digested it. So also, when you're thinking about products and market, you don't have to have something for everybody, but, don't get discouraged, depending on these numbers associated. If you wanted to get into tinctures, just figure out what is selling in that state associated with those tinctures and try and tap into that revenue stream, as well as making maybe a unique type of product. The other component that I really wanted to address here was the best educated guess of what concentrate should I produce. I know concentrate's 22% of the market, but is there a specific route that I should go? Which kind of brings me into my next slide here. Major products. Now, give everybody a second to kind of digest this. California vape pen market reached 1.2 billion in 2021, and all concentrate edibles, vape pens market experienced growth within the exception of concentrates in Washington and Colorado. And we can talk a little bit about why that is. But when you look at overall concentrates, the drastic growth between these products, the really important other thing of, going to market is how you make your decision on what your state is. So what I would want to do if I was going to be starting a business in, let's say, Colorado I've started a business in Colorado and wanted to see, okay, well, what makes up majority of the concentrate market? It's wax and shatter. Is wax and shatter one of the most sought after concentrates as far as primo, establish my brand as the highest quality? No, it's not, but it's having that consistency associated with that product, as well as that volume play within that market. It doesn't have to be your bread and butter of what you built your brand off of, But there's certain areas within the concentrate market, which is the growth of 22% in California, or you're like, okay, well, I'm going to hop into Colorado, but we're minus 6% in concentrate sales. So where are these products selling? And that can help determine exactly where you want to enter your market, whether or not that's wax, shatter, diamonds, live resins, all sorts of different consistencies within that, or vapes. As we can see here, vape pens is always an ever growing, category in California. As mentioned, 20%, $1.2 billion. And then you have Colorado, which was another fast growing market, which was 24%, $353 million. So you see concentrate sales maybe going down a little bit, but it really isn't, because your business as a manufacturer are able to tap into edibles, which is, that 10% range. And then you have your ability to stop into vape pens, which is an increase of 24%. That's much higher than, negative 6% up here. So these are all things to look into associated with the market of what should I be offering my clients. Michigan was an interesting one. It kind of stayed status quo with, a lot of regulation changes, those type of things, associated with, wow, all right, vape pens are going to be extreme here, and the data of why you see everything growing so much within that Michigan market is because of the regulations and licensing structure there. And I would say over the next year or two, when we get that data, it's going to end up being more in line associated with some of these, consistent results where we see with Nevada growing 20%, 30%, Oregon, those type of areas. So you'll see yourself in the 20 to 40 even percent range as their market kind of evolves. Washington still saw great growth, besides in the concentrate. But when you look at Washington, you have a very saturated market. Not saying Colorado and California aren't, but people are about price conscious. There's also factors that you want to say of overproduction. So if you're just a manufacturer, that's another thing to be looking at of, is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market? What products can I sell for the most? What products can I sell for the least? In my eyes, you really should be selling around 6 to 9 SKUs in your offering. And the reason this is because if you have 500 stores to be selling into, because we obviously can't cross state lines, our licenses are, specific to state structure, we're going to end up having that structure of 500 stores. So my market, if I'm selling 3 SKUs to you, my invoice can only be so high to you. But if I'm more of a turnkey solution in whether or not it's concentrates, edibles, vape pens, I can end up hopping into some of these majority products. Well, this kind of leads me into my next slide, where concentrates, edibles, and vape pens, yes, they are major products. They are, the majority of the revenue, but there's still multi-millions of dollars in the non-major products, which is what I like to call the niche products. Smaller manufacturing categories such as beverages, capsules, sublinguals, tinctures, topicals. There is such opportunity in this market. Although it isn't as booming right now, we have nanotechnologies, we have all sorts of things that are really making this industry a big shift. You see pharmaceutical type of products all the way throughout that aren't cannabis infused. You look at what CBD has done with that. Every product has CBD in it at this point. But what are the added benefits of having maybe a THC CBD blend, or what makes your product a little bit different in these categories? Because there are a lot of people who tried to enter this market and just stayed niche into these products and these categories. And in my eyes, that isn't a recipe for success, but it is something, as previously talked about, within those dispensaries, having that total turnkey offering where they're going to you for maybe a topical, concentrates, vapes, all of those different types of products. The other one component that I want to really hit on in the niche products is that when you're selling a niche product, you want to educate the consumer. And when you're also selling even the other majority products, you want to educate your consumer, because in the dispensary lobby, because when they go into talking to that bud tender, they're going to have an idea of the branding of that just educated them. Another key component of finding success and maximizing your overall revenue, whether you're trying to sell niche products or major products within markets. Going through some of the growth, you can see in California, you have 51%. You can see in Colorado, you have 10% growth. You're seeing all growth in the beverages, because beverages weren't that popular. They have taken a drastic shift. Some brewery manufacturers have come in to play here, whether or not it's a small brewery or a large type of brewery. There are people hopping into the beverages side of things, not only from that side of things, but the soda side of things as well, or seltzer side of things. Capsules are a big push. You can see that the industry hasn't quite converted. We look at pharmaceutical, and everyone is kind of pushed back on why pharmaceutical. Why would I want to take a pill? Why do I want to take a tincture? Those are definitely areas, but what I would notice on this chart is Colorado right here. Colorado was the first state to approve retail recreational and kind of set the stone and put the best foot forward associated with regulations on the cannabis industry. We all know California has been here forever, which is why you see it up here in 170 million. But what you also see is these are the most educated markets. So you don't see the growth percentage maybe, but the growth over here on capsules, sublinguals, and tinctures is massive. But so you can end up tapping into that type of revenue. That is really important when looking and analyzing your market share of the total revenue of the state that you're able to capture. I can't stress that enough, because if you're just going into 20% of a pie, that's all you're able to play in, when really your license allows you to contribute into 100% of that pie if it's a concentrate type of company, like an manufacturing infused products, which in Colorado is your license associated with being able to make all of these types of products. So education, education, education. That is your keys to success associated with entering a market. Please, keep doing your Q&A questions so that we can end up, even honing in certain markets for you in our Q&A session. The other thing that I would notice is topicals might be 12% less here, 20% growing in Colorado. And I think that plays a big role into capsules, sublinguals, and tinctures. So I look at these as kind of a whole, but in today's session, and from this source, we had it broken out. So I kind of wanted to show how we combine those things to make the best educated decisions in the market. The only other thing I wanted to touch on here was the untapped potential. See, when we're looking at this slide of how much growth and how much revenue is in here, I do see some of these, especially topicals and beverages, in the very near future might make that shift into majority of products, especially in new markets. As you see these new markets, you don't see New Jersey on here. You don't see New York on here, Maine, those type of areas. You see the ones who have been around for a long time and have the most data associated with them. So depending on the market you're going into, let's get some data specific results so that we can make sure that you're the most successful in that market when you guys are making your decisions with that leadership team. The fun stuff. We have raw material inputs. So what is whole plant fresh frozen? Fresh frozen's never dried cannabis. This is what makes a concentrate or vape a quote unquote live product. When you go into a dispensary and you're like, we have a bunch of live resin. Well, live resin can come into multiple factors. It can come into diamonds and sauce. It can come into so many different areas, which we'll get into here in a minute. But what you're going to do with whole plant fresh frozen is you're going to basically take off all the fan leaves. Once you take off all of the fan leaves, you're going to end up keeping all of those crystals. You're going to chop the plant down, whether or not you did that before removing the fan leaves. And then you're going to stick it directly into maybe a blast chiller to get that freeze right away. Some dry ice, obviously in a bag, because when you're dealing with whole plant fresh frozen, we're going to want to make sure that you're being just as delicate as you were growing it, as you were, harvesting it. So if you aren't in control of your flower, it's really important to make sure that you're having your supply chain as well dialed in on that process and you're comfortable with that process. You also have popcorn and smalls. So this would be, you're going to have all of your top colas, which might go to flour, right? You might have those popcorns and smalls, which it doesn't make necessarily financial sense, depending on which market you're in, to be trimming that small of buds. So you can end up taking that and going into a concentrate type of product, whether or not you're drying it out. So if it's popcorn or small, you can fresh freeze those as well. I personally don't recommend that. I would rather dry them and use them for whether or not it's joints, maybe an infused joint. Those are becoming very popular in today's market. Or you can use them in, types of extraction, whether or not you're going to make a wax or a shatter. Your yields are going to be a little bit better on the popcorn or smalls than they would be on your traditional trim, which would be those crystal leaves that, you're cutting off in that trimming process. You can use this in pretty much extractions of all kind. You can make dry diamonds. It's not the most, flavorful thing as you would get if you were doing it with fresh frozen, for example. So that's definitely something to factor in those decisions on those SKUs. It's important to also allocate what your buying is when you're talking about your raw material inputs, because if you're going after a market strategy of, I want the best in the tiers and the most flavorful, you might be wanting to go with more whole plant, fresh frozen type of material input. If you're going for more of the economy scale, popcorn or smalls, your popcorn or smalls are going to be used primarily for, your wax and shatters, your economy, your $10 to $30 a gram type of concentrates. Field hemp can be used as well in all types of extraction methods. Normally you want to make it into an oil, obviously, prior to, or soak it in an ethanol bath associated with, going into maybe a distillate, which is what a lot of these topicals and CBD companies that you see today, or even CBG, CBN companies, when you see that, they made it into an oil from the field hemp and then infused that into your final product. Trim is a lot like very similar to your popcorns and smalls. You're going to be basically going into your wax and shatters or your ethanol baths to make distillate or crude type of material. And what those plant trimmings are going to be is it's so multi-purpose extraction materials for so many different types of extraction. You could wash it. You could go into hydrocarbon. There are a lot of different areas that trim can be used for. It is a byproduct, right? So unless you're mixing a lot of your popcorns and your trim, you see a lot of people potentially cross over utilizing some of that with your pre-rolls. I encourage you, if you have enough smalls or popcorns, set your pre-roll apart from all the rest. You can also as your trim bins, obviously if you're trimming in trim bins, you're going to have keef associated with it. Again, going back to an infused pre-roll. You can have bubble hash pre-rolls. We'll be getting into those type of things, here in a minute. You also have your dried cured flour. Mostly of this is sold as is, but can be used for nug run concentrates and extracted SKUs. So your yields are going to be higher because it's not the trimmings, it's not your popcorns or smalls. It was the big nugs that were, beautiful, got the most photosynthesis and had the best environment associated with them while they were growing, and they're going to have the highest THC concentration. Those type of components, they're going to be less larvae. By larvae, I mean your different, leaves, how leafy that plant might be. All strains have different components associated with that. So when you're thinking about dried cured flour, again, your nug run isn't going to necessarily fetch you that much higher of a dollar on the shelf, but it is going to drastically affect your bottom line, because each percentage that you get on an increase, depending on what you can get for that flower, is going to contribute to how many units you have to sell. Craft hemp, mostly sold as dried and cured as is for consumption, but is also used for certain concentrates in certain cases. So you also have that trimming, those type of things, but you do have smokable CBD flower, CBN flower, CBG flower. We are drastically getting a lot of different research associated with the effects of all the different cannabinoids. I'm a big pusher of full spectrum hemp, because that is going to give you all of those cannabinoids. And that's what really makes your endocannabinoid system, optimize as you're taking in these type of concentrates. But again, the last thing I want to highlight, this is going to bring you your highest quality product. Extraction methods and material types, my favorite slide of this entire presentation. So as we kind of touched on within this, solventless is always going to end up being, you think about it like organic, non-organic types of products you see in the grocery store, right? It's going to fetch a little bit higher dollar when it is organic. Now, you have not necessarily a stigma is a bad terminology associated with things, but if something's non-organic, people start to second guess something, or what is my ppms remaining in these hydrocarbon things. Granted, with buying from a reputable brand, and this is the other thing to highlight, that consumer isn't going to be worried necessarily about your hydrocarbon extraction having solvent in it or anything along those lines, but sometimes the user is going to feel a lot better when you have a complete solventless process. And maybe those plants were grown with living soil, organic growth, all the way from, a single source type of product. You see, single source has become a very popular word here in the cannabis community recently, at least in the most educated markets. Those educated markets have allowed, people to kind of set themselves apart, like certain brands have done in your grocery store that you notice from organic to non-organic. Your hydrocarbon side of things as well that I want to highlight is when you're a reputable brand and you have something that you're offering, consumers are going to know, just like, let's use Johnny Walker for an example, what you're getting when you buy the red label compared to what you're getting from when you're buying the blue label, but they're constantly going back because of the consistency and quality. So dial in your vendors, or if you're in control of your own destiny, be growing very similar, genetics, add new genetics, produce what is working and what is working well. Now, let's just say these two products, before we get into the things that we want to extract in those, let's just say these two products right here aren't doing as well, or that material came out with poor coloring, poor flavor, or something along those lines. Well, you can use all of these different types of products to go straight to distillate. Let's say, for example, making crude to go to distillate. But if something in hydrocarbon didn't work out and it was darker, or something that you didn't want to put on the shelf, or solventless didn't work out and it's not something that you wanted to sell or put on the shelf, distillation would be the next route of that crude oil. All right. So you can not only have crude oil as a material type, but you can also have use these products to go into a crude, which would then end up going into a distillation. Now, a distillation, you're going to end up with, remediating what I like to call the boo-boo. And you're basically going to make it into a clear type of concentrate. It might be black up your front, but it's going to be a highly potent, highly desirable product for topicals, edibles, vapes. You can end up reintroducing those with different types of concentrate here. Now, I'm getting into my next slide a little bit premature, so we're going to go back to material types here, where solventless, fresh frozen, primo. That's going to get you your best. Which your yields are going to be about 5%. Now, wet weight compared to dry weight. when I dry a pound out, I'm losing all the water moisture. When I fresh freeze something, I'm keeping the water moisture in there. So if I were to dry a pound, that's really going to be equivalent to about a quarter pound fresh frozen in overall value. So I'm going to end up with more biomass pounds when I'm fresh freezing compared to dry. So that is one of the components, which what you say, I'm getting 1 pound per plant. Well, you're actually getting 4 pounds per plant if you took that to fresh frozen. Your popcorns and smalls will come from if you dried and cured that flower. You took all of those top nugs, and you're going to end up obviously with the higher quality concentrate within these two side of things. When you're dealing with craft hemp or popcorn or smalls, it's not going to be as flavorful. It's not going to be as high yielding, but totally a certain biomass that you can use to make solventless extraction. A lot of the same reasons in hydrocarbon. When you have your fresh frozen, going to create your highest dollar products. Same thing with your dry cured, highest dollar products as well as highest yield. You're going to end up making a little bit more of potentially going to those dried diamonds, like I was talking about, if you are going to be processing dried and cured flower. You can also do remediation. Say, unfortunately, I got powdery mildew in my grow. Unlike solventless, you can end up remediating those type of products, which is going to end up having a more drastic effect on any of those microbials that might have grown. You also had your craft hemp that you can end up processing through hydrocarbon, also ethanol extraction. Popcorn and smalls, same thing. Trim, same thing. As you saw over here, a little bit lower yielding, different SKUs that will come out, which we'll get into that here in a second. What can we make? What's top shelf? Those are the things that I was just touching on briefly associated with this. So let's go into what we saw was the fastest growing area, which was vape pens. I think partly this is because of convenience. This is, I can take it in there. I don't smell like weed. It's very, going to the mountains, vacation, all of those type of things of why I think vapes are becoming successful. When you look at vape pens as well, 91% of the market uses a 510 thread. One of the things that I would encourage all of you to be aware of is keeping things consistent, because batteries are expensive. I'm not saying don't produce batteries or have branded batteries, but the chances you're able to sell those, especially as your market gets more and more educated, is going to be a lot harder. Not every battery is the same in vape pens as well. They all burn at different voltages. Now, obviously, you don't want too low of a voltage. You don't want too high of a voltage. There are pens and batteries that will allow you to set yourselves apart if you're going into a competition, for example, which I'll get into here in a minute, because those are very important, especially in those niche products or those majority products, to be entering those competitions so that you can leverage that and set yourselves apart on the shelf. The other component of that is if you launch a new product and you win a competition, or if you have a high volume store, put that trophy in that store, right? That's going to sell. People are gonna be like, wow, okay, yeah, I want that one. So another area of extracted SKU matrix and how you set yourself apart from the competition. We'll be going into packaging here in a little bit, but really wanted to touch on how to get the most out of your vape pens because of how high of a market and how fast that market is growing. Top shelf live vape pens. So again, those live products, that fresh frozen, is fetching the highest dollar in the vape pen market. Then you have your mid shelf vapes. You have your BHO carts that might be, that's butane extracted or propane extracted carts. Those could be mixed with a small amount of distillate. They could be mixed with distillate and then terpenes. Those are the type of things that are going to create your mid-shelf vapes, where your live resins are going to be 100% live resin or THCA or those type of things. And your 100% live rosin carts are going to be a combo of, either 100% rosin, THCA, a combination of, one kind, those type of things. Your distillate carts can be made with, let's just say, a CO2 terpene or a botanical derived terpene, which you're going to see more in your economy type of vapes down here. Your CO2 carts, basically, when you're doing CO2 extraction, I think there's a place for it, but really you're limited to vape pens and edibles when you're doing CO2 extraction. So, be careful making that large investment when you could potentially be going hydrocarbon and solventless and having more SKUs available to you as your market changes. Having that versatility associated with that roller coaster we all ride every day, being able to make those shifts are going to be really important to the success of your business. Then you have your dabbable concentrates. Top shelf, extracts are going to be your live hash rosin, your full melt 6-star, your sauces, your HTFSE types of live resin. Then you're going to have your mid shelf extracts of dabbable concentrate, which is going to be your live resin, which would be like your butter or your nug run BHO, where you're going to have a little bit more of a flavor, a little bit higher of a yield. Like I was talking about earlier, you might get $1 or $2 more, but really the difference is a little bit more flavor and a little bit more ability to say, hey, this is nug run. All right. That might sell a bud tender to sell your product more. It really depends on the market. But that percentage 2 or 3 that you're getting at that, especially if you're in a saturated market, is going to drastically affect that bottom line. So other things to factor in. If you can pick up, pounds like you can in Colorado right now for under, $800. Your economy extracts are going to be your raw distillate, your BHO wax, your raw CO2 oil, your bubble hash that's not full melt. Normally in the bubble hash side of things, when you're talking dabbable concentrate, I always tell people to take that non-full melt, make it into a live rosin, because then you're right back up here to the top shelf. You're going to yield around 70 to 80% from that non-full melt bubble. And you're going to end up with going from a $1 sign to a $3 sign. Even with that loss, you can definitely make that up. Your raw CO2 oil, as discussed, you're mainly going into vapes. You can make a syringe, same thing with raw distillate, and then you can reintroduce a terpene, small amount of terpenes to it so that it turns into a dabbable concentrate. It looks a little weird when you're putting a syringe on maybe your dab rig, but it's definitely a product that's out there. It also can be used for people to infuse their own edibles going into the next segment. So if somebody wanted to make their own edibles at home, I've seen those type of syringes with their economy extracts be purchased for those specific reasons, based on potency regulations that can be sold in the dispensaries. They can dose what they want to dose for. Those are important for medical patients as well. Edibles, top shelf edibles, solventless infused gummies, candies, chocolate, and other edibles are going to be your top shelf edibles. Now, your solventless, especially in Colorado and California, has blown up. It has set yourself apart. Again, kind of that organic, non-organic type of candy, chocolates, and other types of, consumable products. Then you have your mid-shelf edibles, which are your live resin infused candies, chocolates, and other edibles. Economy edibles are going to be based on distillate infused gummies, candies, chocolates, where you're using the distillate, which is a highly potent, but it isn't necessarily that high end, maybe dabbable extract or mid-shelf extract that was then infused into your edible. Tinctures, capsules, and topicals. Again, you're seeing the trend here. You're seeing the trend of solventless, and you're seeing the trend of hydrocarbon extraction of these units. And then you're looking at distillate. So when you're going into saying, okay, how am I going to price my products? What's selling the most? How do I want to set myself apart? These are key indicators right here to really help you make those predeterminations. Infused pre-rolls, again, especially depending on the market, pre-rolls are massive, especially when people visit certain states. They're going in there, they don't want to go buy papers and roll it, nor do a lot of people, know how to roll a joint or a cannagar or those type of things. They also make these cannagars that last for hours. So if you're going to a big party, those things sell for $200 plus dollars, which could be filled with half an ounce of, and 7 grams of concentrate. Hash rosin infused pre-rolls, full melt infused pre-rolls, and the cannagars are definitely your top shelf. And again, you have to use top shelf flower. That really matters associated with this, not necessarily trim. Same thing in the mid shelf edibles. You're seeing, maybe your popcorns and, your high-end shake start to end up in your mid shelf edibles and your economy edibles. You can, even if it's not a full melt bubble hash, you can still sprinkle in bubble hash at a homogeneous ratio per joint and end up with a very high end or mid shelf type of pre-roll. Moving on here, most companies become profitable by employing multiple extraction methods. Now, this holds true so often. For my brand Cushmasters in Colorado, we basically took the step of being a hydrocarbon and solventless lab. We also did distillation for a while. We still do it, but it's not the biggest component. But that's because you can shift with the roller coaster based on the extraction methods that you might have hopped into. Now, that plays the role of what I mentioned earlier, where you're talking about a high-end product or your market demand changes because of the economy. You're looking at inflation right now in our economy. If you go 3 months ago into the dispensary, their volume of what they sold is drastically different than what is being sold right now. Everyone is about value. They're about, wax shatter, distillate vape pens. And that's the drastic there. You still have your connoisseur. Don't get me wrong. But as your economy changes, just as much as your industry is educated, those are factors of why having multiple extraction methods is going to be really important to the success of your overall business. Having the ability to say, hey, I got a total of 10 SKUs for that one store. Again, that increases the overall ability for that dispensary to be that one-stop shop for you. So that is really some big, important information of, multiple extraction methods. Let's go to packaging design. Well, we put a bunch of different brands on here. It's the way that you form factor. It's so important. But you got to be really, really careful. This is where I see a lot of people, be like, I need to set myself apart. We went over so many ways you can set yourself apart by not spending an insane amount on your packaging. I released my packaging in 2017. Fortunately enough, I haven't had to change it. It's flashy, it looks good, but when you're going into certain packaging and you're spending multiple dollars on that packaging, jar cost, packaging cost, all of that included, you also want to factor in how long is it going to take my packager to put these things in this package, right? How are these packaging, things coming to me? Those are all factors to factor into what SKUs you want to release and how you want to, release those SKUs. But make sure that you're not spending multiple dollars on your packaging. Find the most economical, flashy, packaging and differentiate yourself on educating the bud tender as much as your packaging and what you're putting and the ingredients you're putting in there. Highlights, education in the overall dispensary lobby. Again, very, very important. Putting trophies and, all of those type of things in your marketing material, as well as potentially in high volume stores, is also a great way to see higher throughput. There's loyalty programs. There's all sorts of ways to incentivize bud tenders now to be pushing your product and making it that stand out in the shelf. just as much as you can be saving money on what you're doing within your packaging. So these are key questions I wanted to identify before we go into another Q&A. So if you haven't yet put in, some Q&A, please do, and we'll go through these one by one. These are things that you should take to your leadership group if you are a part of that leadership group, or your executives, or even if you're just, a tech. It's really important to say, hey, did we address these types of questions when we're releasing or entering, our business plan, or expanding to maybe we do hydrocarbon and we're going into solventless, or we do solventless and we want to go into hydrocarbon or distillate. Those are the components and questions that you want to ask. Can I make something else with the equipment I have now? Very important, because, again, CO2 can only produce vape pens and topicals and edibles, right? Where, yes, you can make variations of those SKUs, but you can do all of that with hydrocarbon on top of create dabbable concentrates. So it's, components and decision-making that, factored into, am I following the roller coaster and can I shift on a dime? What other product categories are out there? That is another component of, hey, is there one company selling this one SKU? Well, how did they, what types of concentrate are they putting in that SKU? What are the minimum barriers to entry in each of these categories? What is the overall market research? What investments would be required to enter that category of interest? Make sure that we're addressing these questions as they come. Who is smart enough to help me figure out what the risks and rewards are of these choices? What growth hacks have others done to see success in these categories? We are a wealth of knowledge associated with helping businesses succeed. You see these happy hours, you see these executive types of events, you see these panels and webinars. Take advantage of them, and also use the data as much as you possibly can. Get pricing sheets, even if it's a competitor, even if it's marketing material from a competitor, we all can work together to make this industry great. And let's go into some Q&A.
Thanks so much, Josh, for that informative presentation there.
Of course.
So now if we could just start off, a few people had some questions related to different terminology. So one audience member here asked about full melt. Could you explain what that term means?
Absolutely. So when you're doing ice water extraction, you have multiple grades. So when you look at a trichome head of a stock, I think I have it. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but you see these little balls at the end of the trichome heads. Those are the trichome heads. And then you have the stem associated with that. Now, when you have the stem associated with that, and you touch your plants or something along those lines, those trichome heads are super brittle. The trichome head is what makes up a full melt product. And those are captured in certain microns of your ice water hash. So you're agitating your biomass, right? Whether it's fresh, frozen, dry, whole plant, nug, whatever. And then you're basically filtering all of that through different grades from anywhere from 220 all the way down to 25. And you have a multiple bag set. As you're running that water through, because of the aperture of those bags, you're going to end up collecting different grades in each bag. And so in your 72 to 120 bag, you're going to capture majority of just those heads, not broken heads, not stocks, those type of things. Those are going to fall in outside of those ranges, whether it's below or above that 72 to 120 micron. And that area is normally where you see your full melt hash. Now, it is strain specific what will end up based on that trichome head structure, where you're going to find the most of your full melt necessarily. And that's normally a full melt, bringing it down to the dabbing side of things. It's when your nail burns completely clean. It is something that if left out at room temperature, it will grease instantly. It will basically melt at room temperature because of the purity of that trichome head.
Thanks, Josh. One of the terms you used for plant material previous to the extraction process is trim. And someone here asked, would recycled flour from rejected pre-rolls be considered trim?
From rejected pre-rolls, you could definitely, if we're talking about a contamination, let's say a microbial contamination, absolutely you can, extract that and call it, trim or shake, and then put that through like a hydrocarbon process to make it a sellable product again, or take it all the way to distillation at that point.
Thanks. And can you please define craft hemp, and what should prospective growers of that be looking for or trying to accomplish?
So field hemp is obviously going to be in, a less quality of a hemp. We're growing for biomass, maybe stalks, very little cannabinoid profile. When you're talking craft hemp, it's the same way that genetics on the THC side have been bred. They're bred for maybe a CBN. They're bred for maybe a CBG. You're going to have more of that cannabinoid profile of a full spectrum type of product in that craft type of hemp, compared to maybe a field hemp where you're after, actually making type of hemp clothing or those type of things.
Cool. Also on the hemp topic, someone asked, they said they have an interest in entering the CBD industry, body and skincare, and they're looking to start B2C online. Do you have any tips for how they can best differentiate their online products and services?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the ingredients that you're putting into it. Obviously, cost is really important when you're hopping into the CBD market. You have to figure out who your top 5 competitors are. That would be the first step that I would look at. What are they being successful with? Do I have any analytics to look at of why they're successful? What do if you can even buy some of their products, try them yourself, give them to some friends or respected colleagues that you value their opinion, and what worked, what didn't work, what did they like about this product, and gathering experienced data to then make the formulations associated with what you're going to go to market with. I think that has been the biggest thing to set yourself up for in that type of area. I always talk about, a product of mine. It's a topical where the formula works on its own. CBD is the added component. Without CBD, it could sit on a store shelf, but I wanted to add that extra ingredient because it's got all of these extra properties that can help somebody. We're not talking about curing people. We're talking about helping and relieving certain things associated with the products that we're launching.
Could you say, is anybody conducting secondary extractions, either ETOH or BHO, after running material through an H2O wash?
So I wouldn't personally go to you can definitely dry it. There are people doing it. You would, because of how much water, you would have to re-dry that product. And then what I would do from that is take to ethanol, because you're going to strip more. You're not, when you're taking it to a hydrocarbon, BHO or propane, you're not going to strip as much, and you're not going to be making a dabbable concentrate. So it behooves you to go to ethanol from, already processing it, and you might end up with a higher percentage of CBN and CBG and those type of cannabinoids than you will with, and it's going to be a lot lower yielding. So just make sure that you're optimizing your equipment. Hey, if your equipment isn't operating and you just washed solventless and you have the ability to run it over here in ethanol, go for it, because we want to use, just like the Buffalo, every single piece.
Someone asked here, is distillate a non-solvent extract after the distillation process? They said fractions, in my opinion, are better to work with and cleaner than hash without any impurities. What's your take on that?
As far as, going from distillation, normally you do have a soak associated with your distillation process, and then you're putting it through a roto to then fraction off into your distillation, whether or not it's a short path, wiped film, those type of areas. And yeah, I mean, I do agree that, you know, depending on the finished product that you're going in, you might want to be working in fractions. There are values to all of these different types of processes based on the SKU that you're going to be releasing. But if you're talking a solventless extract that, you know, might not have come out well, you know, you can go directly and skip that soak and roto and go into a short path and allow it to stay completely solventless. Even with 1 to 2 passes, I've had success making these solventless products and solventless distillate without, you know, with skipping that roto step.
Can you give more details about hydrocarbon distillation manufacturing units and bulk sales market and project costs?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously with, you know, distillation, you're going to need to be in a C1D2 environment because of the ethanol, and C1D1 environment because of hydrocarbon. And those rooms are normally, you know, somewhat expensive. So Precision, for example, has, you know, pre-built pods, right? They have EXP boosts. They have, you know, those type of environments that, you know, you can plug and play into your operation to kind of save the headache of a stick build type of room. Now, with hydrocarbon, you're looking at, you know, okay, what can this piece of equipment do for me? Is it going to be obsolete the next year? You know, one of the biggest things with, you know, PurePressure's, you know, products and, you know, now Precision's products as well is how do we continue to evolve those products without making it like the iPhone where you're obsolete the next year, right? How do we keep you, the customer and the client and the innovators of the space with the tools they need to be successful? That is one of the biggest things coming from, you know, an owner of a lab that I look at when I'm going and scoping equipment, because how do I know that I'm not going to go buy this at MJ and or a trade show and end up basically coming back the following year and saying, wow, okay, this is definitely, you know, I should have waited a year. You never want to make that decision. So when speccing equipment, how is your product modular? How does it set yourself apart from the competition? And I think that you're going to get a lot better answers, and you're going to be able to read through the lines of somebody trying to sell you something compared to, you know, a solution that's going to last your operation multiple years, if not the eternity of your, you know, facility.
Cool. This audience member asked if you're starting to add warning labels similar to smoking tobacco, and they said they're thinking ahead to avoid a future lawsuit. That kind of varies state by state, right?
Yeah. Compliance is definitely going to vary state by state. I always encourage people to be more cautious than not less cautious. You know, for an example, I put on, you know, there's a certain terminology in Colorado that I put on my packaging that's required. And hey, at the end, I said for pets as well, you know, this includes pets. You know, just because you don't want to be giving, you know, so there's things that you can definitely evolve to, you know, protect yourself above and beyond what the regulations state. And I encourage everybody to do that if they have the room and it's not going to make your packaging, you know, over complex.
Great. Would you say solventless is the biggest growth trend in the industry for the next few years, or one of them? And is the market demanding solventless more and more?
Yes. You look at solventless edibles, that blew up in Colorado and California right now. The more people who become educated on solventless are, you know, it is the fastest growing concentrate in the industry. And it's going to continue that trend. I've looked at so many data reports, and solventless is going to be the future. And when you look at, there's going to be a place for all of these types of extraction. And I know some people might disagree with me on this, but the data doesn't lie. And when you really look at the overall genetics that are being bred right now, you're going to be able to take, it doesn't matter what genetic type, and do whatever type of extraction you want, depending on the equipment that you have. That is a really important component that I didn't touch on in this area, where when you're buying product and you're not in control, or you are growing your own product, make it so that it can be go to solventless and it can go to hydrocarbon. So you're making the decision and the determination, not based on what you have in biomass and genetics, but you're making that determination on what does my customers demand right now. And you can take that product and shift it left or right without having to buy specific material for a certain type of extraction.
We have time for a couple more questions here. So here's one. As a farm that can do their own crude oil and distillate in bulk, how do I find the customers who can buy bulk / wholesale quantities of oil and distillate?
So bulk, you are definitely going to target your infused products manufacturers. I mean, they're called MIPS here out in Colorado. Normally you can get your licenses list associated with the state. It's normally public information. Some states don't allow it, some states do, but I'd highly encourage you on bulk sales to go to the people selling it on the wholesale side of things and these big distillation companies to give them that leg up, or potentially if you have the ability to go all the way to crude and make extra products, talk about white label opportunities. So you can buy, or processing opportunities. Those are other great areas that you can find success selling bulk or wholesale bulk type of products. You got to fill that void, because when you launch a product, for example, you don't want that product to fall off the shelf, because then they're going to replace you with another brand. So being able to be that catch-all for a business, or for a business selling wholesale product, is really important.
Cool. We have time for one more question. Would you say there's a similar category sales breakdown for various types of extracts? So for example, is there data on the year-over-year increase or decrease on profits of rosins versus rocks, or sauce versus shatter?
Yeah, there definitely is. A lot of it is paid data, unfortunately. But when you're looking, a lot of these dispensaries are contributing towards these different markets, right? So they're and these data companies, so they're contributing all of their data from sales, which is going to end up showing that trend. Also, like in your enforcement divisions, normally they, for taxation purposes, create average prices that they're going to tax you on, whether you're selling it for that or not. But they look at the data from like a seed to sale system like Metric. That's going to be the free information associated with what they're going to tax those type of businesses on. That can at least get you a head start in looking into those specific analytics. But those are out there. They just, you have to dig a little bit deeper to find them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for answering all these questions, in addition, again, to the presentation earlier. It's been great having you join us today. And that concludes today's webinar. We'll be sending out an email with the link to the video, as well as the questions and answers here.
Yeah, thank you all for joining, and really appreciate the time. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our number, website, Instagram, all of those things. We're available for you as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.